What else? Avar. By the way, in terms of to pass over, right, one of the most important associations that should come up for all of us is, who are we? Who are we? I can't hear you. We are Ivrim, which is always translated as the Hebrews, right? But why are we called the Hebrews, right? That's just a phonetic translation of Ivrim. We are the ones who cross over. We are the ones who have the capacity to move beyond, to not be defined by limitation, but by our ability to grow and to be expansive. What else does avar mean? Avar also means, right? You said it means to sin, aveira. Amazingly enough, it also means to forgive. Over al pesha, to cross over, to move beyond sin. The same shoresh, the same root, also means to die, as the most powerful, most dramatic paragraph of the Unetaneh Tokef opens, right? Kama ya'avrun, how many will pass over, right? To pass away. And amazingly enough, the same shoresh, the same root, also means to be brought to life. How do you say fetus in Hebrew? Ubar. Ubar. Wow. Okay, Mr. Paitan, you're telling me something. You're using this word that is pregnant, no pun intended, right? With so many different meanings, there's something that you are trying to do with this piyut that I have to pay attention to. By the way, also in a lesser known reference, ubar also means to interpolate, right? To interpolate a month in the calendar, when we add a month into the calendar, right? La'aberet hashana. La'aberet hashana. So this is a rich word signifying many different experiences, many different meanings, and many different suggestions as to what a relationship with the ultimate source of meaning can be about. So now our task is, let's look at the different places where some version of this word appears in the Unetaneh Tokef, and let's try to understand what in its place it's trying to tell us. Because this tagline, Ma'avirin et roa hagzeira, is basically screaming out, right? This prayer is not what you think it is. It's way more than what we understand it to be. So now let's go back and look at the different places where some version of this root word appears. And the first one I want to draw your attention to appears in the second of the main paragraphs on 143, on the fourth line, V'chol ba'ei olam ya'avrun lefanecha kivnei maron. And all creatures, all lives on earth, as it's translated, will pass before you, ya'avrun lefanecha kivnei maron. Okay, so what does this image evoke in you? The shepherd, right? Nobody is exempt. By the way, we tend to think Rosh Hashanah is for the Jewish community, right? And it would seem only fair because we're the ones who know that we have to come to shul and that we have to pray these prayers. But what is this line actually telling us? Everybody, all lives, all creatures, everybody's being passed for judgment on this day. Now, you say it evokes an image of a shepherd because kivnei maron, right, is almost always translated as like a flock of sheep, right? And this is the image, and we'll talk about this in just a few minutes, that often evokes in us a sense of loving compassion, right? As a shepherd shows towards his or her flock. But hang on. Take a look at the second text. The reality is that translating kivnei maron as a flock of sheep is not necessarily the only way that it is able to be translated. So if you look at the sugya from Masechet Rosh Hashanah, we see, this is the source too, the Mishnah teaches on Rosh Hashanah, quoting us, V'chol ba'ei ha'olam, ovrin lifanav kivnei maron, that in Rosh Hashanah all creatures pass before God like b'nei maron. The Gemara asks, what is the meaning of the phrase B'nai Maron? The Gemara answers. Here in Babylonia, they interpreted it to mean like a flock of sheep, using the Aramaic, Kivnei Imarna. Reish Lakish disagreed and said, no, it means like the ascent of Beit Maron, which is a place that he's referring to, which was very steep, so that somebody standing on the top of this hill could look down at everybody else who was below and observe everybody, right? One standing at the summit could discern all those climbing the mountain with a single look, right? Because how is it possible for one set of metaphorical eyes to see everyone who must come before them, right? It's like you're standing on the top of this cliff and you can see everything and everyone below. Rav Yehuda said that Shmuel said in another opinion, like the soldiers, ki numeron, of the house of King David, who could be surveyed with a single glance. And in fact, it is this interpretation, this actually wording, numeron, a Greek word which means a band of soldiers. This is how it appears in this line in the earliest manuscripts of this prayer. So that it meant, when it was in the earliest versions of it, that everybody will pass before God like a band of soldiers passes before their commander, before the general. What is a general who stands on that dais, observing all of their soldiers marching before them? What is that general looking for? What's that? Well, if they see flaws, oy vavoy, right? But what are they looking for? Precision, conformity. I mean, if you're a soldier and you're, marching and your commander is looking for you, what are you going to make sure? What are you going to make sure of? You're going to make sure you're in line and that you're walking in lockstep to the choreography that you've been trained to walk in. What else are you going to make sure? What are your boots going to look like? Clean and shiny. What's your uniform going to look like? Pressed and tucked in. Because the mark of virtue is not individuality, self-expression. Not in that scenario. The mark of your virtue is that you know how to fall in line. That you've done everything that your community deems proper, appropriate to do. And your potential to be welcomed into the next phase of your growth in that community, right, is measured by your ability to stay in your lane, right? And to do what is expected of you. So what is the experience of that commander before whom we march like a band of soldiers? What is the relationship between you and that authority? Warm and loving? Fear? Distant? Norah, reverence, in the true sense of the term. Yamim Nora'im, we talk about them as days of awe, but really and truly they are days of terror. That's what Yirah means. Terror, right? So that's one image. And you know what? Plenty of us come to shul on the Yamim Nora'im, filled with dread over, did I cross my T's and dot my I's? Did I do everything that I was supposed to do properly? Is my shirt tucked in and are my boots polished? Do I know the choreography? Have I walked the way I'm supposed to walk, right? Let's be honest. A lot of us bring that baggage, that fear, that dread, that sense of being scrutinized to shul. All right, but let's look at the next line where our word appears in yet a different phrase. All right, I'm continuing on the same line, 4 lines down from the middle paragraph on 143. Kivakarat ro'eh edro ma'avir tzono tachat shivto. As a shepherd herds their flock, directing their sheep to pass under their staff. Again, this image of the shepherd, right? It brings out in us that sort of warm feeling, right? Of us being in relationship with the ultimate authority, ultimate source of life that is one of compassion, understanding, right? After all, we're taught, why were Moshe and David chosen for leadership positions in the history of our people? Precisely because they were shepherds, precisely because they demonstrated, never mind to human beings, but to animals, a sense of loving devotion, a sense of endless concern and attention, right? But not every reference to shepherds is so warm and loving. So that if you look at text number 3, you look at this excerpt from Yechezkel, from the prophet Ezekiel. The word of Adonai came to me. O mortal, prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Oh, prophesy against. Yes, I'm Canadian. Prophesy against the shepherds of Israel. Prophesy and say to them, to the shepherds, thus said the Adonai God, oh, you shepherds of Israel, who have been tending yourselves, right? Is it not the flock of the shepherds that you ought to tend? You partake of the fat, you clothe yourselves with the wool, and you slaughter the fatlings, but you don't tend the flock. You haven't sustained the weak, healed the sick, or bandaged the injured. You haven't brought back the strayed or looked for the lost. You've driven them with harsh rigor. Thus said Adonai God, I am going to deal with the shepherds. I will demand a reckoning of them for my flock, and I will dismiss them from tending the flock. The shepherds shall not tend themselves anymore, for I will rescue my flock from their mouths, and it shall not be their prey. For thus said Adonai God, Hineni ani. Here we think about Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and like the opportunity for us to stand up on the fullness of our dignity and integrity and humility and vulnerability and say, Hineni, right here I am. No, Yechezkel's saying, oh no, it's God who has to stand up and say, Hineni, I'm here. I'm here. God has to say, why? I am going to take thought for my flock. I will seek them out. And here's where our verse gets quoted from Yechezkel. As a shepherd seeks out their flock when some animals in their flock have gotten separated, so I will seek out my flock. God is saying, I now have to step in and be the shepherd. I will rescue them from all the places to which they were scattered on a day of cloud and gloom, which is what the Unetaneh Tokef reminds us of, right? So Ezekiel's image of shepherds, loving, warm, attentive, responsible leaders of the community, not so much, right? But here they seem to be corrupt leaders, the metaphor suggests, who take advantage of their flock, who enrich themselves at the expense of their flock, who care not a whit's, right, moment for the fact that some of their flock may be suffering, may be in need, so that God is the one who has to come in and show love and tenderness and compassion. And what's going to happen to those shepherds? They're the ones who are going to be judged. This reference here is about, on Rosh Hashanah, corrupt leaders being judged for exploiting those for whom they are responsible. Everybody excited for Rosh Hashanah now? Right? Right? The more we can understand what's embedded within the text of this prayer, the more we can access the incredibly daring but also expansive experiences and feelings and beliefs and questions that we all bring to its recitation in the sanctuary. So let's look now at the second part of that line. Ma'avir tzono tachat shivto, who causes the flock to pass under their staff. Take a look at the fourth text you have in front of you, because that line is an echo of yet another text. This is from the very end of the book of Vayikra. These are the last verses that close out the book of Leviticus, and they're verses that are talking about the mitzvah of giving ma'aser, of giving a tenth of our possessions, right, to the sanctuary. And what do we read there? V'chol ma'aser bakar v'tzon asher ya'avir tachat hashevet. Right? You can hear the words. In each one of these texts, you see our lines here of the poem are being quoted. So here, all the tithes of the herd of the flock, of all that passes under the shepherd's staff, every 10th one shall be holy to Adonai. But here comes the kicker, making this yet another approach to Rosh Hashanah. Lo yivaker bein tov lara. One must not look out for good as against bad or make substitution for it. If one does make substitution for it, then it and its substitute shall both be holy. It cannot be redeemed. These are the commandments that Adonai gave Moshe for the Israelite people on Mount Sinai. Every 10th animal goes to God no matter what. You cannot take your flock and go, oh, hold on, I just want to line everybody up. Okay, you beautiful one, you get to the back. You strong one, you go to the back, right? So that the 10th one, I line up to be Nebuch, right? The runt of the, right? The verse is very clear. You cannot choose good or bad. Whichever one happens to be the 10th goes to God. And if you try to substitute another one, both the 10th and the substitute get taken for God. Now you've given 20%, not 10%, right? That's a very, very different message about Rosh Hashanah. What is the message of these verses of Vayikra?
First, we don't know where the count begins. So when you're in a room full of people dominating, you may think that maybe the person next to you is number one, but maybe the person next to you is number 8. So you don't know, number one. But there's an arbitrary.
This is a message about arbitrariness. It's a message about the randomness of life. This is a message about the randomness of life. Here we have this line at the end of the poem that says, who shall live and who shall die? Oh, teshuvah, tefillah, tzedakah, I can at least, right, try to, if not cancel the harsh decree, at least soften some of its painfulness, right? And this is a text embedded within, echoing within the words of this poem that's saying, you know what? At the end of the day, there is a randomness. There is a randomness in the universe. There is a randomness that dictates who's going to live and be here next year and who will not, and who will die in a timely way and who will die way before their time, and who will die by fire and who may die by water, by hunger, by thirst, who will wander and who will be rooted and who will be rich and who will be impoverished. That no matter how deeply you engage in the effort to lead a righteous, redemptive life, there is a certain randomness that none of us will ever escape. Now, can you imagine on Rosh Hashanah in our machzor a prayer that basically says, I mean, on the one hand, you could say, that's not very helpful. But on the other hand, you could say, you know, we are a people of such honesty. We are a people who are not afraid to stare directly at life and to ask the most important question, not how do I control all of this, but actually, how do I surrender to this? How do I surrender to the fact that some of us are going to be sick and some of us are going to stay healthy? How do I find meaning and live with purpose and dignity and confidence in the face of the randomness that's at the heart of life? It's a wonderful question. I'm gonna hit pause for a second and come back to that, because that's our next iteration of the word, and we're gonna get there in a minute. I just want to say one more thing about this line here that adds the element of randomness into the equation of what it means to experience Rosh Hashanah. And I want to remind us of the warning implicit in the verses in the end of Vayikra that say that if you do try to manipulate things, right, if you do try to make a substitution, you'll end up paying much more dearly. That the more we try to control, to impose this objective, unyielding system of right and wrong, of good and bad, when we know that the righteous suffer and the evil often triumph, the more we ourselves will be burdened. The more we will suffer, the more we will lose and be asked to sacrifice on our journeys towards finding a way to live with a sense of rootedness and meaning. Right? Now, as a representative of a tradition that is oftentimes very much about here's a path of holiness and here's a path of, what would you say the opposite of holiness is? Of what? Debauchery? Indifference is probably one of the best terms, because, right, to not be engaged in that. But as a representative of a tradition that tries to give a framing to life, there's great humility that's required when you teach that framing, because we all know only too well that the imposition of that framing can sometimes cause more pain than it does to bring a sense of clarity, or at least a sense of direction. Right? I will never forget Andy's daughter Tamar, who's now 23, when she was in 6th grade, and our kids went to the Solomon Schechter School in New Milford, New Jersey. There was an absolutely horrific car accident. There was a chase on a street called Boulevard running right through Teaneck, where someone had stolen a car and the police were chasing the people driving in that car, and Tamar's friend was, innocently driving to school, being driven to school, and their car got mixed up in that chase, and their car was hit, and her schoolmate died. Terrible, terrible tragedy. And in an effort to make sense of that tragedy, how could it be that a 6th grade girl gets hit by a car on her way to school? The rabbi at the funeral gave a eulogy and espoused a theology that tried to save everybody from the thought that maybe there isn't an order to the universe, right? And in order to impose on a situation of such emotional, psychological, and spiritual chaos this idea that, in fact, there's no randomness, but, the world under God's direction is a tapestry where we can only see the back, where the threads are all, messed together. But if you turn the carpet around, and that's only a perspective that God has, you'll see the beautiful, intricate design that makes so much sense and that has such clarity to it. This in an effort to basically say to the people gathered at this funeral, you shouldn't have any questions. You shouldn't see the mess that this death suggests, because it's all neatly designed, right? So this is a very, very, on the one hand, humane statement that the Unetaneh Tokef is making, that there is randomness in the world. It's also a statement that is very threatening to a lot of people. And how do you continue to embrace a tradition that tries to suggest that there is a framework which is worth committing to in an effort to take of chaos and make of it a sense of meaning, a sense of being able to put one foot in front of the other, and to develop bonds to both oneself and to others, to dig deep within a tradition and to reach far beyond in order to be able to hold oneself and others up when the chaos of life comes crashing upon us. Right? It's a very, very, very dramatic line here. Mark. We can control who it is that we wish to be in this mysterious, majestic experience of life. Yeah. The line is that we should do tshuva one day before we die. And how do you know when you're going to die? Do tshuva every day. Okay, I want to move forward into the next place where this word appears, and that is in the bottom of page 143, the opening line of the most dramatic paragraph of all of the Unetaneh Tokef. Kama ya'avrun v'chama yibareun. How many shall pass away, and how many shall be born? Mi yichyeh u'mi yamut. Who will live and who will die? It's unclear whether this list is meant to be exhaustive or whether it's meant to be illustrative. There are physical blessings and curses here. There are emotional, psychological blessings and curses. They are usually read in couplets, as was pointed out, where the blessing comes first and the curse comes second, right? Who will live and who will die? Who will live a long life and die at their moment, and who will die before their time? Mi b'kitzot, mi lo b'kitzot. Who will be at peace and who will be troubled? Who will have serenity? Who will be disturbed? There are some exceptions. It's understood that where it says mi ba'esh mi ba'mayim, esh is much worse than mayim, fire, water. But if we accept that there seems to be this rhythm, then the first one seems to be a little bit off, right? If you read kama ya'avrun v'chama yibareun, who will pass away and who will be born, it should be the opposite. So for that, I invite you to go back to that definition, one of the definitions of the words that can be formed from the root avar, the word ubar, or fetus. Ubar, which means fetus. And if you look at the first line with that meaning in your head, then it might be able to be translated, who will be conceived? Kama ya'avrun, who will be sort of in fetus, right? I think I just made up a word. Who will sort of be conceived, be created? V'chama yibareun, who will actually be able to progress along the formation of life, that they will actually be fully formed and created. Mi yichyeh, who will actually be given the opportunity to live. U'mi yamut, who will die. If you look at those first two lines and those two couplets, you can see there a very short, pithy illustration of the arc of a human life. Who will be conceived? Who will be fully formed? Who will be given the chance to live? And who will ultimately die? And what would that bring to our consciousness of this prayer? A wholeness of life, a circularity, if you will, of life. The notion of the many different passages that we go through, I'm using the word passage, again, the root avar, that our human lives take us through, that though the remaining couplets seem to be in stark opposition, that in fact, there is this journey that we make, a journey that is filled with all of these in different moments, perhaps sometimes at the same moment. You heard Rolly today, right, had to wish a family both condolences and mazal tov. How does that happen? Because that's what it means to be human and to be open to the variety of experiences that human life is going to bring to us. And I remind you here also that avar, that same root, can mean both to die, right? As in pass away and to be created. Rosh Hashanah is suggesting to us in these dramatic lines the thin distinction between life and death, between joy and suffering, between illness and health, between rootedness and wandering. It is a thin line, oftentimes the inverse, the other side of a coin. Not only that our experience can change momentarily, but that oftentimes one experience has within it the echoes of the other. And that is our burden and our blessing, if we're able to feel at that level of depth. I want to bring the last example and then offer some concluding thoughts. Take a look at the paragraphs on page 144, which we often think of, like, as soon as we get to the Uteshuvah, Utfilah, Tzedakah, Avirina, Teroah, Hegzerah, we sort of like, right, it's over. The Unetaneh Tokef is over, but it's not just yet. There is one more dimension to this experience of the urgency of this prayer, to the embrace that I opened up with. One more variation to the kinds of experiences, beliefs, values, theologies that we bring to our Yamim Nora'im that is echoed in the middle paragraph, beginning with the words, Adam yesodom me'afar, that a person's origin is dust. V'sofo le'afar, each person will return to the earth. If you take a look at all of these phrases, each person's origin is dust and each person will return to the earth having spent life seeking sustenance. Scripture compares human beings to a broken shard, kecheres hanishbar, kechatzir yavesh, ketzitz novel, ketzel over, a broken shard, withering grass, a shriveled flower, ketzel over, a passing shadow. There's our word again. A fading cloud, a fleeting breeze, scattered dust, a vanishing dream. Like, we are nothing, right? Just a passing shadow. I'm like a speck of dust. Schmutz, well, all right, you don't have to get too aggressive there. I'm not saying schmutz, but here we are. We're saying, on the one hand, we're saying we are, like vapor. But in the same prayer, we're saying, but I am worthy of being saved. Right? I might be nothing, but look who thinks they're nothing, right? That Eli, when he was giving his shir, he quoted, right, that great joke. We're nothing, we acknowledge. On the other hand, that nothingness is worth something. We're nothing and we're everything. And no matter how low we are feeling as a result of the tumultuousness of human experience, we are never far from that sense of worthiness of being saved. But how do you make sure to remember that? In this unbelievable midrash, I invite you to look at in the 5th text. I just want to give you a framing. In this midrash from Eicha Rabbah, the rabbis are debating how they can possibly reverse the evils and the suffering of the exile in the wake of the Chorban, of the destruction of Yerushalayim, to try to redeem people from their pain. And they bring out, in this midrash, it's fascinating, they bring out a whole lineup of our best and our brightest of our ancestors, right? To test the concept of zechut avot, of being looked kindly upon because of the merit of our ancestors, right? This is a theme that runs through the Yamim Nora'im, right? Where we call to God's mind all of the virtues of the matriarchs and the patriarchs, and even of the ram in the story of the Akedat Yitzhak, in the hopes that by God remembering the virtues of these others, God will be moved to show us compassion. So in testing the efficacy of Zechut Avot, they bring out all of the ancestors to try to reverse the course of the exile. And none of them work. None of them work. Until they get to Rachel. And Rachel opens up and starts reminding God of the plan that her father had to deceive her beloved Jacob into marrying her sister Leah instead of her on their wedding night. And when she learned of that plan, she became so distraught that she came up with secret signals so that Yaakov would know whether it was really her or somebody else on their wedding night. But then she began to feel compassion for her older sister Leah and wanted to avoid causing Leah undue disgrace or shame. And so she ended up telling Leah what those secret signals were, so that Leah and she could now continue the ruse, and Jacob wouldn't catch on. And she even, in the Midrash it says, she even hid under their bed that night, so that when Jacob addressed his wife, he would hear Rachel's voice and not Leah's. There you go. So Rachel stands before God as part of this whole testing of this Zechut Avot, the merit of our ancestors, and this is what she says to God. She reminds God of all of that and then says, I acted kindly with her. I was not jealous of her. I didn't cause her to be shamed and not jealous. I didn't cause her to be shamed and disgraced. What am I? Flesh and blood, dust and ashes. Uma ani she'ani basar v'dam afar ve'efer, she says. Right? Echoes in our text here. That I was not jealous of my rival wife. That I didn't allow her to be shamed and disgraced. But you, look at the last line, bolded in our machzor. Ve'atahu melech el chai v'kayam. But you are the merciful, living, and eternal King. Why were you jealous of idolatry, that in the end is of no import? Why were you had exiled my children who were slain by the sword and allowed their enemies to do with them as they pleased? Like, if I could put my ego aside, if I could act kindly towards my sister and care for her and not be wounded myself by all of this, why couldn't you? Rachel says to God, Atahu melech el chai v'kayam, really? There's your, Shelley, there's your Unetaneh Tokef, right? Railing to God. God's mercy was immediately revealed, and God said, for your sake, Rachel, I shall return Israel to their place, for there is a reward for your labor, and there is hope for your future, declares Adonai. Your children shall return to their country. What is the message here about judgment and Rosh Hashanah? What additional voice is this reference bringing to the layers and layers? And what is it making room for in this moment? What's that? Women? Okay. Self-compassion? Okay. Shirley? The importance of showing compassion for your rival? Okay. That our actions can change God. Exactly. And what are those actions? Get up and advocate for yourself. Stand up and say to God, hey, if I can do this, for those of you who were with me on Thursday night, if I can swallow my pride and pick up the phone and say, do you forgive me? If I can swallow my pride and say, okay, fine, I forgive you. It's over. Right? If I can do that, can't you? For all the tears that I remember seeing streaming down the faces of the adults around me in shul as a child when these words were chanted, the Unetaneh Tokef, right? And all the fear and trembling. Unetaneh Tokef, Kedushat Hayom, that's what those words are all about. It's terrifying. And yet, if we can, through our terror, stand up and say, come on, give me a break. I'm doing the best I can. Right? It's not just that we are being held accountable, but that the tradition is inviting us, and I say this with the greatest of respect and humility, but that this is a day on which God is accountable. That God is ki'ilu passing before us. And that we have not just the right, but the responsibility to say to the Kodesh Baruch Hu, to the singular oneness that unites all of us, and say, if I can do this hard work, I expect you will do it too. A couple of words of conclusion. The dramatic change in the sort of crescendo to this poem on the top of page 144, from the original rabbinic text of Mivatlin et Roa HaGzeirah, from canceling out the decree, to Ma'avirin, to this word which we saw can mean so many different things. This dramatic change, which too often gets read without being actually heard. This is a text that allows us to feel acknowledged in our sanctuaries. It's a text, a word, a single word, that actually extends its limbs, its loving liturgical limbs, to create the widest embrace of the varieties of human and spiritual experiences that we represent when we come into the sanctuary and we recite this prayer on the 2 days of Rosh Hashanah and on Yom Kippur. It creates this theological mosaic, right? These multiple pieces of understandings and feelings and beliefs and questions and doubts and anger and joy and surrender that we all bring to this season of introspection and renewal and repentance. And these are distinctions that don't only exist between us, these are also varieties of beliefs and experiences and questions and doubts that exist within us. And they vary sometimes from year to year, sometimes they vary from moment to moment, and all too often, I think it's fair to say they exist within us simultaneously. We bring all of this to those moments of reciting this prayer. The point of this prayer, just like every other, is not theological consistency or purity. That is not the enterprise of tefillah as we know it. But tefillah, and this one in its beautiful way, is about engaging with the mystery and with the majesty of life, however it is that we relate to it and however it is that we experience it. And that just as life is messy, so too are our feelings about its origins and about its purpose and about how we can be in the deepest relationship to it. And that is just fine, says the Unetaneh Tokef. That is just fine. Bring it on, says our tradition. We can handle it, and we can share it in the most beautiful, melodic, uplifting, soul-opening, heart-opening way together. One final thought, and then I'll conclude. Really good prayer is prayer that leaves us with homework. Right? The end of Adon Olam is not like, okay, close the book and I'm done until Mincha. No, good prayer actually leaves us with work to do. And I want to leave you with this work to do. I'm sure this is not the first time that you're hearing someone offer this, but it's important to restate. There's a certain energy that comes with the questions, who shall live and who shall die? Who in their end and who not in their end? Who by fire, who by water, who by sword, who by animal? There's a certain energy that seems to suggest that at the end of the day, this is all out of my hands. I can't really do anything about it. That we sit where we stand and we are asking someone, something other than ourselves to please answer these questions. And I want to suggest that while that's true to a large degree, that there are parts of our destinies that are beyond our control, I want to remind us, especially when we are reciting this prayer, that there is a whole lot of our destinies that's actually in our control. The choices we make about how we care for ourselves physically affects our health, our longevity, and sadly, our shortening lifespans. The choices around how we treat each other affects our sense of belonging and connection in the world, or our sense of loneliness and alienation. The choices that we make around economic policies affects growing inequality in our societies amongst our citizens and affects those who are enriched and those who are impoverished as a result. The choices around how we treat the planet The environment, our precious natural resources, affects those who will go hungry and thirsty, and those who will find sources of nourishment, those who will become vulnerable to raging fires and raging storms, and those who will find sanctuary. The choices we make around providing access to health care affects those who will struggle with illness and disease, with mental health, and with suicide. September is Suicide Prevention Month. And those who are oftentimes the victims of people of those symptoms, including hatred and gun violence. So rather than conjure up, when we say these words, some image of divinity before whom we are singing and praying and pleading to answer these questions for us, I ask you please, on some level, in some moment, to create the space to understand that we are asking these questions of ourselves too. We are asking these questions of one another also. Who will we allow to live? And who will we allow to die? Who will we allow to perish and to go hungry and to wander? And who will we bring safety to, nourish, and give sanctuary to? In many cases, the ultimate questions of life lie well beyond our hands. But in many, many, many others, they lie deeply within them. Berosh Hashana yikatevun, uviyom tzom kippur yechateimun. Berosh Hashana yikatevun, uviyom tzom kippur yechateimun. Ktiva v'chatima tova, Shana tova if I don't see you. Thank you so much for being here today. Shabbat shalom. Shabbat shalom.